Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, here we go again. Another counter-terror bill to tackle yet another threat posed by extremism, another absolutely essential set of measures to keep our nation safe to be rushed through at breakneck speed, predictably accompanied by yet another escalation to the threat that we're supposed to be experiencing. We're invited to believe that everywhere there are terror plotters and backers, jihadists, bombers, extremists, and just good old-fashioned nutters. No one is safe, threats are everywhere, therefore we need this legislation as quickly as possible, just like we've needed all the other bills as quickly as possible. There has now been 7 counter-terror and security bills since 9/11. All of them have been rushed through Parliament. Wow. All of them have been absolutely necessarily required, and all of them have been fast-tracked, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't suspect this will be the last counter-terror and security bill. In fact, I don't actually suspect it's going to be the last one in the next calendar year. I'm presuming that there will be at least another one, possibly another 2. And those bills similarly will have to be rushed through Parliament to meet the growing escalating threat that we're going to have to deal with. We are in an age and an era, and we've heard it so many times, so many contributions, that there will always be an existing growing threat that we have to address. So what do? We do the same things. Every single counter-terror bill that we've looked at in this House could probably be characterised by a few key features that seem to crop up again and again when we look at this. We've got to gather, retain and collect vast amounts of data, personal data from internet service providers. This time it's internet protocols that's got to be collected just in case we might find something or something could be used in the future. This is an issue and a cause that's very dear to the Home Secretary's heart, given that she still hankers after our Snoopers Charter, and she'll probably have her way if there was a majority Conservative government next year, and I'm fully expecting that will be included in any Conservative manifesto as we go forward. We've got to continue to subject suspects to internal exile, because that's exactly what we're doing. I applauded the Conservatives when they reversed the whole idea of Labour's control orders, and I thought that TPIMS was an improvement in what we saw from the new Labour approach to what was control orders, but here we're back to effective internal exile again. We're working up to depriving people of statehood. We're stopping people from travelling. We're looking at effective home arrest without trial. It's the usual stuff. And of course I'll give way to 100%.
I think one of the honourable gentlemen remembers, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, remembers in the previous Parliament where 90 days detention without trial seemed to be the sort of litmus test of the Blair government's machismo. That went by the wayside. But given what he's been saying about the 7 bills and the Groundhog Day aspect of this, does he ever see the 90 days suggestion coming back again?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, because I know that he's been paying real attention to some of the conversations that we've been having. And I saw how Labour behaved in all this. What a government. Establishing, setting up and effectively monitoring the anti-civil libertarian state. And my honourable friend is absolutely spot on. Features such as 90-day detention, ID cards, national databases. It was the one thing that I applauded the Conservative government when they came in that they did. The first thing they did was the bonfire of the ID cards, the national database. Isn't it so depressing that they falled into old manners and old customs, because they're right back to practically where the Labour government were, the creation, the maintenance and construction of the anti-civil libertarian state. And we always get this wrong, always get this wrong. At the heart of all these counter-terror bills, there's this critical balancing act that plays out. On one hand, our need for security, the need to make our citizens safe, and on the other hand, the civil liberties that we all enjoy have been part of a democracy. Of course I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank the member for giving way. Does he not consider there's a problem in that there's a sort of mentality and a default position that anything to do with national security, terrorism, or whatever, has to be dealt with by secretive special courts and a secretive special process, all designed to protect the security services from any kind of accountability? Does he not think we should actually rely much more on the basis of a criminal law where people commit criminal acts, then they should be tried for a crime?
The honourable gentleman reminds me of the last feature that I wanted to include in terms of what we always see in these counter-terror bills, and that's the very thing that he mentions. all about suspicion, all about the powers of the Home Secretary and how she will be allowed to exercise them. Never testing this in courts because the evidence isn't substantive enough. It's all to do with this idea that somehow we've got to make people safe in this country by imposing all sorts of control mechanisms on suspects. And if they were serious about this, if they believed and had the courage of their conviction, take it to court. Test it in the public court. Give people an opportunity to defend themselves. Now, if you're subject to one of these new TPIMs, you have no means to try and fight your defence. You have no access to having that tested in court. And they talk about how extremism develops. They talk about radicalisation. They talk about the furthering of ideologies. When we're doing things like this, it is absolutely no surprise that people might take a very jaundiced view about some of the things that happen. Now, I enjoyed the member for New Forest's contribution. It was good. There was very little that I could disagree with about it. Some of the things that are necessary to tackle extremism is the sort of things that he presented, as it was from the Right Honourable Lady, the member from Salford, all absolutely necessary. But we've got to look at ourselves. We've got to look at the decisions that we made. We have got to understand the sort of things that we have said and passed and done which may have inflamed the situation. Now, if we can't do that, we are not acting responsibly. We have got to make sure that we account for our actions and we see what it leads to. Some of us, during the debate on the Iraq War, I was in the House when this was happening, as were other members, said what is going to happen with the Iraq War, an illegal war that inflamed opinion and passions, not just in communities here, but communities around the world, that there would be a consequence, there would be a reaction. That has come true. That has come to bear. And the reason that we're now having to mop up with this type of legislation, with these type of measures, is because of some of the critical decisions that we took, some of the really appalling and bad decisions that we made, that we're still accounting for. And if we don't start... Yes, of course I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Member for giving way. Would he not recognise that in equal measure, perhaps the decision not to intervene in the events in Syria may well have also caused some of those people who saw the terrible events played out on their screens about what was happening to some of the vulnerable families in those circumstances may have been equally inflamed? Would he accept that?
What I accept is a failure to recognise some of the international dynamics, the influence and communities within this country. I think it's a failure to do that. Now, the solution always seems to be, as far as I can see, that we've got to intervene. We've got to try and make the world better. And sometimes we're unaware of the unintended consequences that comes from that. All I'm saying to this House is at some point we have got to acknowledge what we have done in terms of framing the conditions and setting the environment where these things happen. And a failure to do that, and a failure to acknowledge that type of issue, I think we will be hampered in how we approach these things. And the way that the very good things that are in Prevent and all the anti-radicalisation programmes will fall and will fail because we've missed out a crucial ingredient in the holistic view of how we have to look at these things.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. And I heard Syria mentioned then, of course, when it was last year, the idea was to intervene in Syria on one side, and then it came to this year, the idea was to intervene in Syria on the other side. Now, surely, as we encourage professionals in all sorts of walks of life in this country to critically self-assess, I think the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right in what he's saying about the speech. He's moving towards the point where government and MPs and Parliament should be critically self-assessing what the consequences of the actions have been over decades past.
Well, again, the Honourable Gentleman is spot on. We should be proofing anything that we suggest and put through and the impact and effect that might have and unintended consequences on communities that we represent. If we were to do that, I think we would start to make progress when it comes to these things. And what does this bill do? What is this designed for? Well, this bill is specifically designed to tackle the threat posed by so-called Islamic State, which, according to the Home Secretary, has given energy and a renewed sense of purpose to subversive Islamist organisations and radical leaders in Britain. Well, you're no kidding there, Madam Deputy Speaker. And what does this Rush bill therefore propose, which is different from all the other bills that we had? Well, it's got all the usual features. They're all there. Of course they're all there, because that is a bedrock.
Order. If the honourable gentleman would just allow me to deal with the 7 o'clock motion, and then I will come back to him for him to complete his speech. 7 o'clock motion, Minister, to move formally.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. We must now take the motion relating to deferred division. Minister, to move.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Pete Wishart, you may continue.
Speaker, I thought I was going to get one of my traditional and routine tickings off from you. So I'm very grateful that it was just an interruption for the 7 o'clock.
Season of goodwill, Mr. Wishart. Please have the floor.
I'm grateful for the early Christmas cheer, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you very much for that. Getting back to the bill. What more and what new measures are therefore proposed in this particular piece of legislation? Well, I suppose the unique feature, the different selling point in this one are what's called these temporary exclusion orders. They're new. That's a relatively new feature, and I don't think I've seen much discussion of these before. These are measures, of course, to ban British citizens suspected of travel abroad to fight for terror groups from re-entering the UK. And there's cancellation of travel documents, of watch lists and no-fly lists. And we've got the cancellation of passports at the border for up to 30 days, with the police and border forces able to seize the passports and tickets of British citizens if they suspect an individual intends to engage in terrorism-related activities at their destination. This, to me, seems to suggest and move us quite conveniently and neatly towards the idea of statelessness. Now, we've looked at this before in terms of some of the other issues and measures within this House, but this seems to be the drift and the trend of all this. And I would be grateful to the Minister's response to tell me where we've got with this 30 days issue. And I listened to the Home Secretary talk very carefully and very clearly that the government's in control about allowing people back in. Well, we've heard some of the difficulties. What happens with the breakdown of bilateral relationships with other nations that are not prepared to play along with the UK's game with all this? Surely an effective state of statelessness will obviously emerge from this. Then we've got the more enforcement of T-pins with authorities to force suspects to move to another part of the country, amounting to what is internal exile, and what I observe is no great difference to what was, in fact, the main feature of Labour's control orders. And then we've got this curious stuff about the colleges and universities, the expectations of our higher education institutions, which will now prevent individuals from being drawn into terrorism. This includes banning extremist speakers from campus grounds. How this is to be achieved without massive impacts on academic freedom and freedom of speech in our higher education institutions is beyond me, and I'm certainly looking forward to hearing any of the guidance notes about how this is going to be maintained and guaranteed, because I know the concerns that are already starting to come from our universities and colleges, and I listened carefully to the Right Honourable Member, the Member for North East Fife, who only yesterday said that there was a concern about how this will be represented in colleges and universities. So we've got to be very, very careful about how we pursue with this particular type of measure. And then perhaps most controversially, there are measures to require internet service providers to retain data on the so-called internet protocol addresses to enable authorities to identify individual users, which of course brings us very neatly to the ongoing concern and trend towards the Home Secretary's much coveted Snoopers Charter. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're all in the business of doing all we can to keep the people of our nation safe and secure. But it doesn't always mean that we have to necessarily agree with the Home Secretary in everything that she says from the dispatch box. Some of us might even have a different way of doing things and different suggestions about how we get this balance right about ensuring our safety and security while making sure we don't compromise on our civil liberties. That's why in Scotland where we have specific responsibilities on this agenda, we take a different view about how this agenda can be better progressed. Now, in Scotland, we want to ensure that our police and our other public bodies have the tools that they need to tackle and prevent terrorism, but also to maintain a community where civil liberties are respected and measures introduced are proportionate and have full community support. Now, we have our own separate and distinct legal system in Scotland. We have a range of devolved responsibilities. We actually have responsibilities for delivering large parts of this agenda that's in this bill, particularly when it comes to the prevent part of it. But once again, we've seen the total, almost lack of consultation between this government and the Scottish Governments, who have specific responsibilities for delivering large swathes of this bill because of devolved competencies. Yes, give way once again to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful, Honourable Gentleman, for giving way. And does he think, as I think is emerging in his speech, that over these 7 bills that he's mentioned and the responses of the governments, and both governments here, Labour and Conservative, that over the years, that the reaction here has been must do something. We're not really sure what, but just must do something. And that seems to be the driving policy. There isn't much thought in the policy, but the policy of must do something. And it's probably headline driven, the policy.
Well, that must do something has probably been increased as we approach an election year, because one of the things that the Conservative government have done, which is totally different from the previous Labour government, was they've actually gone a bit more cautiously and treaded just that more gently and carefully into this particular area. Labour, it was all guns blazing, straight into the Labour anti-civil libertarian state that they so carefully constructed and made sure they managed so effectively. The Conservatives have played this game a little bit differently, but we're now in election year. What is a good means to get people overexcited about political issues? What do you do? Get a terror bill. Make sure that we're seen to be hard on this. This will differentiate us and challenge the Labour Party and all our political opponents to say that they're doing it wrong. It's not a game that we're particularly interested in playing. So we've got this idea, and we've got this conversation we're having between government and the Scottish ministers. And the Scottish Government didn't even get sight of the provisions and some of the measures in this bill at first reading. Now, I know the Minister has been in touch with our new Justice Secretary, so he will know the unhappiness there is in Scotland about some of the aspects of all of this. What the Scottish Government has asked is that because we have responsibility for the public bodies which are mentioned in so many bits of this bill, we want proper consultation. We're not interested in this fast track and get it through as quickly as possible because it's an election year. We want to do this right. And where we have devolved responsibilities, where we have responsibility for delivering this agenda, we want to make sure that the public bodies which are accountable to our Parliament will be properly consulted so we can shape up and make sure we have a proper agenda. So what we've asked the Minister is take Scotland out of the prevent side of these measures. And I've seen already that the schedules have been dropped in part of this which relate to Scottish public bodies. So I'm suggesting and I'm hoping that the Minister may be open to this approach and that he may be looking at making sure that we at least have the opportunity to engage properly, to consult properly with our public bodies and can make the right decisions which is in suiting with our agenda and our responsibilities. So that's good. But sometimes we want to just do these things. We tend to look at things like the prevent strategy in a proper, holistic way, looking at how public bodies could also promote cohesion and well-being and democracy. That's the way that we differ when it comes to looking at these things, and we hope to do this. I just want to say something last about my commitment for taking this on, Madam Deputy Speaker. David Haines, the British man that was so brutally executed by ISIS forces in Iraq, was a constituent of mine. His family were in Perth. I was at the memorial service that was held. It was an appalling act. And what that did was bring it right home to my community. The way that the people of Perth responded to what they observed, that brutal, appalling murder, was nothing short of magnificent. They made sure that David Haines was properly commemorated, that his memory will endure and make sure it will go on in Perth, and it was fantastic. So I know how these issues are brought home to specific communities, and I've seen the wonderful way that communities unite, make sure they get round that family, make sure they're supported, and try to understand. But the most impressive thing for me about that, Madam Deputy Speaker, was I saw a real attempt to understand what was going on within this, more so than probably the government has done. Because people wanted to try, why did this happen in our community? What was the special conditions that led to this happening in a small, sleepy little city like Perth? So we know these things. We've got a job of work to do, every single one of us in this house, to keep our community safe, to keep brave people like David Haynes, who only wanted to go out there to try and ensure that the world was going to be a better place, that communities without help and assistance could be helped and assisted. All of us have a responsibility for this, so I will take no lectures from anybody in this house about being soft on terrorism or our government taking no interest in this. We all have an interest in doing this. We might not all agree, and I have disagreed vehemently with the Right Honourable Lady for Salford with the approach that the Labour government taken. I was at first quite keen on what the Conservative-led government were doing. I'm less keen on it now, but let's all work together. But please, let's look at this whole thing holistically, in the round. Take our responsibilities for the things that we do wrong. Challenge the horrible extremism and ideology that exists in our communities. But let's do it together. Do it sensibly. Do it constructively.